so we've got Mr. Femi Additional to, shed some light on the subject matter. Good morning, Mr. Additional. Thank you for joining us today on the program.
Good morning. Thank you.
Well, when that news broke, many thought, wait a minute, is that true? Did it happen? But they're still processing it. They were asking us questions as though we were there when that decision was taken, but clearly we were not. So if you could just give us some background, because when they said the performance was weak, what criteria was used in that consideration, if you will?
Well, what you just said didn't come from us, because they said performance was weak. If you look at the president's statement, in no place will you see that. Not at all. In no place will you see those words, that performance was weak. He didn't say that. Rather, he said he had called them personally to thank them for their services to the country. And so they needed to move on to other things, and he replaced them. In no place did he say their performance was weak. The president must have had reasons for dropping the two ministers, but there was no place it was said that their performance was weak. It could maybe be conjectural from those who have been analyzing matters.
So would it be wrong for them to have, come up with that sort of conjecture to say, to attribute weakness to why they were sacked?
Well, conjectures will always be conjectures. It will not be matter of fact. A matter of fact is the president said he had reviewed performance of the cabinet. He needed to reinvigorate for the last run. It's like a horse preparing for the dash home. It gathers all its strength. So the government is just about maybe 20 months left, and the president said he wanted to consolidate on legacy performance and legacy projects. So he needed some reinvigoration, but he didn't say anything about weak or poor performance.
So how do people then process this? Does that then mean that the president, because you said there might be more, we'll come to that later, does that mean that, he can walk up to any minister, maybe in the days ahead, and say, well, I thank you too, without the people necessarily knowing, how do we exactly reconcile reasons? Because that may be what it will be. Or do we expect that perhaps, who knows, whichever minister is also thanked and told to go, there might be reasons, and it might not be the same format tomorrow?
Yes, the president appointed these ministers, don't forget. They were not elected. If they were elected, they will be answerable to the people. But they were appointed, they will be answerable to the person who appointed them, which in this case is the president. So the president is the one who appointed and is the one who can relieve of that appointment. He will have his reasons. When he appointed, he gave deliverables and timelines to each minister. So he is also the one who can assess those ministers based on deliverables and timelines. And if he feels, well, let me rev up this ministry, let me reinvigorate this ministry, he's at liberty to then appoint a new person whom he thinks can give him what he wants within the limits of time left for the administration.
Now, going through the statement or the speech which you eventually read yesterday, some part of it says 2 years and some months into the second term, the tradition of subjecting our project and programs implementation to independent and critical self-review has taken firm roots through sector reporting during cabinet meetings and at retreats. It went on to say these significant review steps have helped to identify and strengthen weak areas, close gaps, build cohesion and synergy in governance, manage the economy, and improve the delivery of public good to Nigerians. And I mean, this sort of gave a background. And I recall that we've had the conversation around setting KPIs, deliverables, such that Nigerians can say, well, you've done well or not. So the question still is, so a lot of people can contextualize this, because I'm sure you've referenced a lot of conjectures. they will ask, do you ever change a winning team? Why change a winning team if the team is actually doing well? So on the back of that, would you say that they performed well and you just thought, let's build on this, or they didn't perform well and you thought, we can do better?
Okay. I'll answer that question in these two ways. One, can you change a winning team? You don't have to change a winning team, but you do reinvigorate a winning team. If you follow soccer just like I do, a team is playing, it has done 60 out of the 30 minutes, is already leading by 3 goals, and it pulls out 2 key players and introduces 2 new ones. It's just to reinvigorate the team. It's not that it's changing the winning team. You don't have to change a winning team, but you can reinvigorate it. Then the second part of your question, do I think they performed well or they didn't perform well? Let me refer you to the good book. It says, who are you that judges another man's servant? It is before his master that he rises or falls. It is only the master that can judge the person he has appointed to work with him.
Well, by extension, I want to believe...
The president is the one, yes.
Sorry, you can land on that. We lost you for a bit.
In this case, it's the president who can then assess those who he appointed. Because when he appointed them, there were timelines and deliverables. Government has what is called its 9 priority projects, which were spelled out to the ministers. In fact, the president said it, that before they were inaugurated, August 21, 2019, they first went through a seminar in which the 9 priority areas of government were spelled out to them. So he's the one who can then assess them based on their performance vis-a-vis the 9 priority areas.
You know, I think the main employers here are Nigerians. I mean, Nigerians went to the ballot to elect the president, who in turn took that mandate and said, okay, these are the things we promise. I mean, you just referenced the 9 priority areas. And he says, okay, let me get a team that can deliver these things. So the president has KPIs. I mean, the cabinet has KPIs. Nigerians have KPIs as well. And I'd like you to just answer this squarely. In terms of reviewing their performance and scoring them, would you say boldly to Nigerians that this team, indeed, is a winning team, and these people that were removed from the cabinet were performing, high-performing players?
Like I said, it will not be for me to do. I said it and I repeat it. That will not be for me to do because I was not the appointer. In fact, myself, I'm an appointee. I'm subject to being assessed by my appointer, who is the president. So in this case, we that were appointed are all answerable to the president. We were not elected, mind you. If you say, you said earlier that the ministers were subject to Nigerians, that would not be correct directly. In the first case, they were subject to the president, and the president being elected is subject or answerable to Nigerians. That's the way to see it. The ministers themselves are subject and answerable to the president. Recall the chief of staff, Professor Ibrahim Gambari, on the day he was appointed and in his interview with Channels Television, he said he will be answerable only to his principal, who is the president. And that's the way it is if you are an appointee in government.
Okay, let's expand this conversation. Markwe also has some questions for you. Markwe.
Indeed, Mr. Additional, I do understand the logic which you're bringing into the conversation in terms of the line of reporting that the ministers do report to the president, and the president in return is also answerable to the Nigerian people who put him in office. However, for instance, if there is no electricity in an area and the people are complaining, the first person who should get that complaint should be the Minister for Power, don't you think?
Oh, yes, he gets it. But do you know that the president himself would already have got that complaint before, maybe before he even gets to the Minister of Power? Get to the president's office, get to the vice president's office, you see a chart on the wall which shows you daily distribution of power around the country. They see this thing real time. They have their hands on this and they know it. So it's not as if the president or the vice president themselves are immune from all these things. They know it. They are aware of what is going on in the country. So it is to them that the complaints will go. It may be channeled through the minister, who is the appointee, but they are the ones elected.
Indeed. Now, I'm looking at the statement which you read out yesterday. You say that the change is a constant. The review has become critical in order to reinvigorate the cabinet, to deepen capacity and crystallize legacy achievement. These are your words. You also say that the president approaches a critical phase in his second term, hence the need to rejig the cabinet to strengthen what he described, and you are very, very careful to ascribe this to the president, what he described as weak areas, close gaps. So when people say that, is it that the ministers did not perform well when something is described as weak? So there must be a reason why it is described as weak. Can you shed a little more light on what weakness means in the presidency or to the president?
Yes, if you just would take a moment to look at the 9 priority areas of government. Strengthen security, fight corruption, revive the economy, enhance agricultural production for food sufficiency and for export, guarantee power as in power distribution and in the petroleum and all that. If you look at those 9 priority areas, you will see the 2 ministers affected. You know that as much as they did, in my esteem, there are areas of improvement in those 2 sectors. It is said that the largest room in the world is the room for improvement. We can always improve in whatever we do, but the president must have what he wants to achieve in those 2 areas within the 20 months left in government. And maybe that was why he did what he did. But it was by no means a red card on their performance. No, he didn't say that in that speech.
Perhaps not in very clear terms, but in terms of his action and showing them the door, thanking them for their services, maybe that's one way of saying that you haven't quite delivered on the deliverables and the targets set for their ministries. Isn't that correct?
Well, like I said again, if the person who appoints you is the one who can assess you. And the president has assessed them, and he feels that, well, in the time left, let me bring in fresh energy. Like the analogy to a football match. When you remove key players, it does not mean that they are performing poorly. You just may want to bring in fresh energy for the remaining duration of the game.
Indeed, you don't replace energy that is reinvigorating. You don't replace energy that is good and going strong. Oftentimes in a football match, when the coach changes players, it will be players who are tired, who have, you know, as you rightly pointed out, may have delivered in the first half, but maybe towards the second half are not doing as well or are not, you know, pulling their punches. And let's not forget that the players who have now been brought into their offices are not necessarily new players. They're people within the system already. The president is not taking new people to the Senate for confirmation. These are already ministers. For instance, the Minister of State for Power and for Works and Housing, who is now moving to the Ministry of Power, and also the Minister for Environment, who is now moving to the Ministry of Agriculture. So there are questions as to whether these people, I mean, in the first instance, they had been put round pegs in round holes, you know, in the first instance, and how come it's taken the administration 2 years to realize that perhaps these people were not pulling their punches as they ought to?
No, it didn't mean they were not pulling their punches. If people were taken from the cabinet and deployed to other ministries. It could be that the president has seen that they were versatile, and so they could do well in other areas within the cabinet. It does not necessarily mean they were weak. It could also mean they were versatile, and that's why the changes came from within. And don't also forget that the president said new nominations will also be made according to constitutional provisions, because the Constitution prescribes that every state in the country must provide a minister. So if the reshuffle has caused that a state or two doesn't have a minister, then there has to be fresh nominations into the cabinet.
Your
Call earlier
statement said
on.
that
Pardon me, Mark.
Our predictions that we could be seeing more in the coming days. Do we have any more insight into what the criteria, as my colleague did ask earlier, what the criteria would be?
Yeah, it would just simply mean that the president who appoints is the one who can also say, thank you for your services, let me bring in fresh energy. The president is the one who will determine that. And what it is telling us is that national service is for God and for country. It is not for ourselves. When it is time for you to go, you go. It is not a heirloom. It is not a chieftaincy title. It is not something that you hold for life. It's just service. And when it is time to go, you live gladly.
Well, I think a lot of Nigerians will be glad to hear that the president hears about things happening to them even before his ministers get to hear. The president, vice president have like a real-time, situation room where they look into things. I think it's quite gratifying to know that, at least for a lot of Nigerians. And on the back of that, I'd like to know to what extent, really, do the KPIs that the president uses to, score his generals, as it were, to what extent does it reflect the KPIs of Nigerians? So simply put, how much did this decision of the president take into consideration the yearnings, the desires of Nigerians?
Thank you. It will amaze you to know what the president knows. It will simply amaze you. Because a couple of times I've raised things with him that I thought I would background. But before I would start backgrounding, he had told me that he was aware. That shows you that the man knows what is happening in the country. I've told this before, maybe not on channels. There was a night when there was so much talk about hunger in the land. One night I went to see him and I said, Mr. President, there is this talk about hunger. Before I finished, he said, I know. He said, I have constituents and I receive feedbacks from them. I have people from my constituencies who give me real-time feedback. I know what is happening. So let's not think that the president is cocooned away from what is happening in the country. He knows it. And he listens to the yearnings of the people. What we must realize is that government at any given time is work in progress. And there is no one government that is going to do everything. It does not happen. No one government will solve all the issues in a country. A government will do its legitimate best, its level best in certain areas, and it will exit. And another government will continue. With the Buhari government, he will listen to the yearnings of Nigerians and he will do his level best to serve them.
So in other words, you're saying that the president actually considered the yearnings of Nigerians, especially when people say the power sector needs a lot of work. There's a talk about people not even getting enough power supply in this time. So they talk about agriculture, food security, food inflation, which is huge right now. So you're saying that these are the things the president considered to make this decision?
Let me tell you a story. At the risk of giving out something that is private and personal.
Can you give me a yes or no first? Then I'd love to hear that story.
I'm going to. You will understand the question better when I answer it this way. Somebody gave me a document to give the president on how to solve the power problem in the country. I took it to him in the office. He collected it. He began to flip through it. And as he flipped through it, he was saying, if only we can solve the power problem. If only we can solve the power problem. He repeated it about 3 or 4 times. And you know what I got from that? It was something central to his heart. Something central to his heart. That if only this administration can solve the power problem. And you know efforts that have been made since then. You know what has been done with Siemens. You know what has been done with Mambila and other projects. Government is working to solve the problems that Nigeria has had to grapple with for decades.
You promised that I was going to understand. I mean, at least I'll get an answer to the question. So is that story a yes or a no?
No, if you choose to now understand what I've said, you have understood it. But if you choose not to understand, then you won't.
Mr. Adesina, my question was quite clear. I mean, I didn't put you through this much trouble just to understand my question. So please don't put me through trouble to understand your answer, and indeed all Nigerians. And I think it's important to know, really, if you know, those issues around, you know, food inflation, the high cost of food, and, you know, power issues, are those things the president considered? And I believe you mean yes.
I am sure that illustration I gave you already answered the question. And the answer is
if that's a yes,
and
then...
of course, on food security, you know, is central to the president's heart.
Okay, I'd like to get clarity really quickly on this part of the statement that you said that as this administration approaches its critical phase in the second term. So this is 6 years already into the president's administration. So what does the president mean by its critical phase in the second term at this time, when a lot of people are even saying, well, the president is close to exiting, you know, his administration. So how is this phase critical?
Well, in a 4-year term, when you cross the 2-year milestone, then you are entering a critical phase, which is the last phase. And when ministers came in August 2019, and you have just left August 2021, that means they have done 2 years, and they won't do another 2 years. So it's a critical milestone for the government. That's what the president meant.
You know, Mr. Adesina, when you highlighted some of those points about the president, you know, knowing what's happening in certain areas, and that underscores the speech which he made in June, that Democracy Day speech, which there he admitted, well, we've not been able to end the violence. He also spoke about agri sector, how some things, figures declined. He would have loved it to be a little higher in that particular speech. So in the same breath, if one can ask, having seen what he said about the agri sector, now we've seen this result. He spoke about security not ending violence, and who knows, would it be right for people to then expect that, well, in terms of security, it just may go the same way. Anything can happen. With the minister, that is.
No. Well, with the minister, no, I didn't quite understand that.
What I'm asking is... I didn't
quite understand the specific question, yes.
What I'm asking is, given those criteria, those priority sectors which they want to focus on, security is one of them. So should people expect that, having seen how things have turned out concerning security in the country, which even the president is not happy about, would it be right for them to expect that maybe the minister might also be thanked?
Well, that will not be for me to answer. But what I'll say about security is that as challenging as security is, even now, we are still not where we were. We are not where we were. You will look at some areas of security and you will have cause, if you are really, really true and dispassionate, you will have cause to thank God that things are better in this area. There are some areas of security where things are a lot better than they used to be. There are still some challenging areas. But if we can crack some areas, then there is assurance and hope that the other areas will also be sorted out within the lifespan of this administration.
So could you just give us some understanding as we wind down on this one? Because, I mean, there are targets, those areas. What is it that, you know, that the government wants to achieve, talking about those critical target areas and consolidating on those legacies? What exactly do they want to achieve so that when we all see it, we know that, oh, yeah, they've hit the target?
Better quality of life for Nigerians. That's what it translates to. better quality of life for Nigerians? Why do you want to secure the country? So that life will not be nasty, brutish, and short. Why do you want to revive the economy so that the quality of lives of Nigerians will improve? Why do you want to fight corruption so that you can free resources for development? Why do you want to grow agri for food self-sufficiency and export so that there will be enough for Nigerians and enough revenue coming for government? Why do you want to fix power so that business, industry, and the rest can thrive? Everything translates to better quality of life for Nigerians. That's why government has set out those 9 priority areas. But by the time the government is exiting, I'm sure it will love to look back and say, yes, thus far has the Lord helped us.
You know, Mr. Additional, why does it come across as though Mr. President told you maybe, you know, behind the scenes why exactly something's happened, but you're not telling us, trying to be politically correct?
No, I didn't get a part of that question. Why did you tell me what?
Yeah, because it appears as if you want to be politically correct and you don't want to tell us exactly why. Because, I mean, isn't it as clear as light and day what exactly happened?
No. I can tell you that there is nothing fundamental I have held back. I have disclosed what I think should be disclosed to Nigerians.
Well, at least from your speech, it does appear as though more ministers will go.
Well, that's what the president said. That's what the president said. But let me, before we wind down, let me make this point.
Yeah.
There are some appointers and leaders who sack with impunity, who relieve people of their jobs and duties and responsibilities with glee. President Buhari is not in that mood. You heard him say, those 2 ministers exiting, he called them privately and spoke to them. Let me also tell you something that happened in 2015. You know, when he came, he inherited some service chiefs. He kept them through June, through July, didn't relieve them of their duties till August. And when he was going to ask them to go, he called me one afternoon, gave me the list of the new service chiefs and said, I have decided to change the service chiefs. This is the list of the new ones, but don't don't announce today. Keep it till tomorrow. I said, why, Mr. President? He said, I want these service chiefs to get home, tell their families that, well, the job is over. He doesn't want them to hear it on radio or television. I said, once you have taken this decision, we can't keep it under wraps. Mr. President looked at me, he laughed. He said, you have not been sacked before. That's why you are talking like that. Me, I have been sacked. I know how it feels. So I want these people to get home and be the ones to tell their families that we have been relieved of our jobs, not that they just hear it on the airwaves. That is Mr. President for you, human and humane. So he will not just remove ministers just for the fun of it, just for the sake of it. In this country, we have seen a president who swore in the successor of a minister with that minister seated in the council chambers. His successor was being sworn in, and he was seated there. He didn't even know. What a worst way to shame a man. Mr. President will never do that. He will call them, he will talk to them, and they will exit joyfully. If any more is coming, you can be sure that they will get the human treatment.
Well, as you said previously, I mean, not today, but everybody have their style. So if some people choose to sack everybody, choose the performing ones, bring them back, it's their style. They were appointed, not elected, you know. But does that mean that you have the names of the 2 ministers who may likely replace these 2, but you don't have to announce it?
No, the president said there will be nominations. That's what he said. It's in that speech.
Okay.
Said there will be nominations.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Femi Additional, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity.
Thank you.
Mwazu Magaji, who's an APC national stakeholder and also former member of the APC Presidential Campaign Council. You're welcome to our studios this morning.
Thanks for having me, Mofe.
How did you receive the news of the president? It's been, some have said this is a major reshuffle. Some have tagged it wielding the big stick. all manner of headlines. But how did this news hit you?
Well, in all honesty, I was surprised that the president could even actually come to terms with the structure of adjusting the government, because it seems as if the first term we didn't have any major reshuffle, major changes. So he actually making adjustment in the council itself is a very clear indication of the sensitivities that is creeping into the president's style of leadership. There are a lot of changes. I remember when we had the last interview here, we made a lot of discussion on changing the service chiefs and the security situation and all that, and how the president can bring some dynamism into his government. And now I think this changes with a very clear statement that it's going to be a continuous process, has shown that democracy is about people, it's about performance, it's about deliverables. And I like the fact that Femi Adesina has clearly stated that there are parameters. What I wanted that parameters to be brought out, it's like what they haven't done is to say, these are the baseline when we came, and this is when you were appointed, and there are very clear KPIs, key performance indicators, that will be used to measure your performance upfront. When you do that, you avoid all the discussion and all the dodging he's doing. An individual can assess himself based on a very clear parameters of performance. You see, when you put an input in a particular system, there will be an output, and there will be an outcome, and there will be impact. These are all captured in the key performance indicators.
Yeah, but the key performance indicators do not have to be for the Nigerian people, do they?
No. In a democracy, these people have been brought in, like he rightly said, first they serve at the liberty of the president. So they were brought on board because the president wanted to help us. That's what the Constitution said. But when they are actually appointed, the retreat that they had needed to communicate the 9 areas that have been very clear, the key performance indicators, the baseline parameters of those 9 areas. This is the reason. You do not have to argue about who does what, or who does well or didn't do well, because the indicators are there. For example, in the case of these 2 ministers, the power sector has been a very critical element of the 9 areas, like he rightly pointed out. And there are parameters that are very clear: generation, transmission, distribution, revenue, performance, and commercial viability of the discourse, for example. And all of these parameters will be lined up. We have a baseline. Like he said, every single day we have reports from the power sector that shows how much power you've generated, what are your stranded power, and what's your transmission challenges, where are your gencos having problem, what is the gas supply problems, what are the hydro challenges in terms of low water supply, or what is the overall health of this power sector. I would like to say that if you look at the 5-year parameters, 5 years ago, and you look at today, believe me, you will not see significant change except for stranded power. Basically, as at yesterday, the grid basically had less than 4,000 in terms of megawatts. 5 years ago, there was more than 4,000 on the grid. I mean, this is a clear KPI. What do you do with power? You give it to people. If you can't give power to the people, then there are issues. You are not either generating well, or you're not transmitting well, or you're not distributing well. Then there are issues of discourse. The discourse were actually privatized about 7 years ago. They were supposed to be reviewed 5 years after presentation. They were reviewed, and it was very clear they were not doing well. And for whatever reason, they were let to continue the way they were going. People were complaining, and there were all sorts of increase in terms of tariffs, in terms of power, without corresponding services. And also major project in the power sector. He mentioned Mambila. One of the key reasons the Minister of Power came on board was Mambila. Mambila was suffering from sort of prioritizations and commitment. And there was an engineer who was brought in on board from Taraba State, where Mambila resides, a $5.8 billion project, billion-dollar project that is supposed to be #1 African project in terms of power, in terms of cost. But he came and he grappled with it. What I'm even surprised is how he was allowed to stay for this long, while clearly he could not move either the major project in the power sector forward. He could not bring service delivery into efficient mode. He could not bring in new projects or new generations that will come on board. The transmission grid lock was still in existence, and still is in existence, and the discourse have not been delivering, and they're not being efficient, and we're allowed to continue this way. So for me, it is all about going forward. I would like Femi Adesina to just sit down and say, look, the president is the president of the country, and he appointed these ministers. But the customers of these ministers are Nigerians. So Femi, as the chief spokesperson of the government, should actually extract these KPIs from these ministers on a quarterly basis, publish them. And these KPIs that are very clear, that are used in this retreat and this review for changing these two ministers, should actually be made clear to the people so that we can be assessing and giving feedback as well. This is democracy, for God's sake.
Interestingly, I mean, we saw a change in terms of how the ministers engage with government. I mean, on a weekly basis now, or maybe bi-weekly basis, we see that, you know, certain ministers or top government functionaries are invited to the villa to brief the press and take questions on the key areas of their deliverables, so to speak. So I imagine that, you know, he's already trying to do
Changes,
that.
yes.
Yes.
So this is the key issue
with Nigerians.
So when they are briefing Nigerians, we should have some measurement of what they are saying. I mean, there was a promise, and then there is a deliverables. We will see percentage changes in where we were last week or last month or last quarter. Usually this type of major shift is quarterly, so that you give time for people to apply themselves and attain some result. And the most important thing here, to be honest, is we have some changes. And the president said it's going to continue. I'm very happy to realize that.
You're holding on to that?
I am holding on to that because we were not having that before. Remember, the changes in the service chiefs took a lot of pressure, a lot of dynamics before it happened.
Has it yielded the desired result?
I believe that. I believe sincerely, like you said, that security changed mode. The Boko Haram problem, the insurgency around Boko Haram, have some containment strategy around. Now, what happened is that there are other security challenges that manifested, which need to be tackled in a different way. I mean, the herdsmen issue, the kidnappings, and all the issues related to agitations around nationalism. These are issues that will be a dynamic challenges to the nation, but they need to be tackled differently.
But you've talked about KPIs. For a number of people, you know that the appointment of ministers, yes, how will I put it now? Antecedents are important. However, political considerations are sometimes bigger.
Yes.
And, you know, you heard Mr. Adesina talk about how sensitive the president is in terms of letting people off the appointment. I mean, he thinks that it needs to be handled delicately. So what are your thoughts in terms of how the president's style, it will seem, his seeming reluctance to let people go, and what impact would you say that has had on his own administration?
I think we've complained for a very long time that there are no consequence management in this administration. And consequence management does not mean negative. It could also be a reward and recognition system. I mean, look, I understand that a minister is not necessarily an expert of the subject matter he's managing. For example, we have Fashola, a lawyer managing works. Roads and bridges are going on, albeit very slowly, but they are going on. Amechi is managing transport sector. I mean, all the railway projects are coming on, and infrastructure are all coming up. So we can see there are movements in terms of that sector. If you look at infrastructure, if you look at security, if you look at the economy is interesting, by the way. This is very important as one of the major 9 key areas. I mean, we have a GDP jump of 5.2 or so, and we have serious challenges with development economics that affect the people. So I would like to congratulate the federal government for attaining a GDP increase, but I would like to point out that the GDP need to translate to quality of life, the well-being of citizens. For example, we have issues related to our exchange rate, which means everything we are importing becomes more expensive, and we all know we have not yet, and that's another weakness, developed a manufacturing and production capability that basically substantially reduce our import, which means we are dependent on very expensive import. There is inflation, there is unemployment, there is issues related to this social investment that we are injecting money, also need to have a template and a framework of a very clear KPI. How much did you put? And what did you generate? Most of this social investment, in my view, are consuming so much billions without corresponding economic impact in terms of productivity and employment. For example, if you want to employ 20,000 graduates, like the federal government is planning to do now, instead of bringing them on board like Empower, giving them allowances on a monthly basis, if you accumulate that amount and put it in a bank as a guarantee and start selecting existing enterprise that have succeeded in the market but needed scaling up, needed capital, needed expertise, and put a structure of supporting them, they will employ 2, 5, 10 people. And if you accumulate that, you will have 50,000 people in a sustainable enterprise space that you will not have to let go because they are employed and the company will exist even after you leave. That is how you grow economy. Countries with large population like India, like China, like Nigeria, like Indonesia and Brazil have developed this sustainable enterprise support mechanism. But we are doing the opposite. We're doing what the Europeans are doing, basically social safety net. But the social safety net of Europe already have a structure and a backbone of existence. So when you put in money, you are only supporting people to exist and inject money into the economy so the economy will start growing. And you do it for a very short period of time. When the economy grows, generate employment, you withdraw that. You can't do that in Nigeria. If you put somebody on a 30,000 monthly for 2 years, you are addicting the person to free money. If you withdraw that, you are telling the person to go and look for 30,000 in whichever way. That is not going to help us in the near future. So I would like this program to change. Now, to go back to another sector, I've analyzed power. The other minister that has been relieved is agriculture. I know the man. I've spoken to him. He has a fantastic idea. He has a challenge, and the challenge is generational. The dynamic of the industry, the dynamics of agriculture require a lot more agile, more viable, more healthy, more younger people. Agriculture is a business now. I mean, the gentleman is a very good person, but he deserves to retire and rest. His age mates are all resting very well. Now, you brought him into an agriculture where even if you want to run one farm, you have to be in the farm every day. You have to supervise your farm. Agriculture is such a huge dynamic space that require. I'm glad that Dr. Mahmoud has been moved. I know Dr. Mahmoud as well. He is younger, he is more agile, and I believe he is passionate about young people. He also knows a lot of the president's network. So I believe this will make a change in the agricultural sector. The problem that Femi was hesitant to admit was the KPIs that I have outlined in power are also very clear in agriculture. In agriculture, we pumped so much billions through CVN intervention, through NASAL, through all sort of anchor borrower schemes. Today, in newspaper, there are issues related to the anchor borrower loan not being paid back as seen as a national cake. Now, the reason that happened was either the criteria was not properly structured, it was actually done on a kind of patronage system that is a man-to-man kind of style, or the enterprise was not fully supported. I had a discussion with one of my colleagues, Dr. Ahmed in Port Harcourt, and I said to him 2 years ago that the agri policy of the president of closing border and injecting money is very good. However, the problem will be when you come to scale up, when you do anchor borrower for 20, 50,000 people, and it succeeds. 1 hectare of rice was producing 4 tons of paddy rice before, and now you're producing 8 to 10 tons. That's good. All the agricultural practices are right. All the equipment and mechanizations are right, and the knowledge brought in, and the seedlings are now the right. What you now need to do...
There are questions as to who has benefited from that particular program, because, you know, at the end of the day, there was a lot of talk around border countries, I mean, neighboring countries coming to, you know, take our grains because they were far cheaper.
Correct. So that's what I'm saying is, when you put a policy, the key focus of the energy and the agri sector is security of our country. Energy security and food security. I think these 2 ministers missed that target. That's why the president relieved them. Energy, clearly, we are not secured. We are selling gas to Europe, we are not using gas. We have no power, so we cannot produce. We are dependent on import because we can't produce. The power is not there, no employment. There are a lot of issues related to power. The same thing with agriculture. If you cannot produce what you eat, and then you structure production for export, you cannot be exporting what you produce for your people and then importing what you want to eat. That is a very warped way. When the border was closed, it was a good policy until it gets to a point where the stimulation mechanism of the production was not sufficient. was not able to catalyze production enough to basically import substitutes what we eat in the country. So I think it's very clear now. The task before these two new ministers is energy security. Whatever we do, when we sell gas to Europe, we must provide gas to Nigeria. When we generate power, we should stimulate production. When we have an agricultural policy, whatever it is, it must focus on employment generation and making agri a business, as well as food sufficiency and food security for the country.
Well, the question I asked earlier is about the politics of it. I mean, relieving ministers, we understand that these ministers are close associates of the president. Yeah. And I'm sure he must have considered also his personal friendship with them.
Correct.
You know, how heavy a consideration is that in politics?
Well, it's very, very heavy because at the end of the day, you have the election ahead of you. When you select a minister...
It's not his election.
No, well, he is the leader now of the party. He doesn't want to lose this election. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, his election is his election, but now he has a legacy to leave behind. And I've had many, many senior members of the party, the Senate President, the Vice Presidents, members of the party, myself, a lot of people have said, if the president leaves, APC may likely collapse. Because he happens to be the backbone. There are two of them, himself and Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Bola Ahmed Tinubu is under intense pressure in the party now. I don't know why. But I do know that these two people were the pillars of APC. And if the president leaves and Tinubu is not very happy, then APC is gone. But this is the point of consideration in terms of the way the ministers are brought in. You can consider politics to get constituency endorsement and support. But the minister should be capable of bringing experts around him. He is heading a bureaucracy, and that bureaucracy is well-trained and well-groomed, that if standards are set, I mean the directors, the permanent secretaries, the civil servants under the ministry, these are very well-trained people. I have worked as commissioner before, and I've come to understand that if you want to sleep, the public service, the bureaucracy will bring mattress for you and a pillow and probably find you to sleep. If you want to run, believe me, they are going to buy tracksuits and a very nice pair of sneakers and follow you run. They know how to do everything. If you want to find a way of messing up the system, they are good in that. There are different set of people. So there are people who know how to mess up the system. There are people who know how to move the system. The public service is rich, but it's on both ways. So the point I'm making is, even if you are brought in on political consideration, what you now need to do is to assemble your best in the ministry. You need to understand you came in to deliver something, so you give people time to show themselves. And I think that is natural. There are people who have different expertise, there are people who have skills, there are people who have social skills, technical skills, and different type of expertise. They are all in the ministry.
How do you think this is going to affect, even though, yes, some people will say that the rejigging has happened within the cabinet, not new people have been brought from outside. These people have been attending cabinet meetings, so they possibly understand some of the challenges and the expectations that have been placed on their shoulders in these new ministries that they're now going to be heading. However, they will still have to take time to understand the dynamics of the workplace. Isn't that correct? And
it
the
is correct,
as
but
well. So how do you think that is going to affect the deliverables which will be expected of them in perhaps a short while?
Yeah, what you said is an advantage, the fact that they've been in council, so the procedures of council and approvals and memos are not strange to them. What is new is the ministry. And usually you change ministers. When you change ministers, the style of leading a ministry is the same in terms of getting results. However, you just need to study the ministry and the personnel for just a week or two. Call for a meeting, interact with them, talk to them, set your agenda, clearly share your vision and the vision of the president, and see how you can get them to be on board with this vision.
The question I'm asking is, don't you think that that's also going to take its own time?
Yeah, you can do all of this in 2 weeks. The other thing also is the engineer that is brought into power is an experienced engineer. He is very capable. He has also worked with Fashola, so there are styles that he may have picked as well. He has his own style and he has his own expertise, and he's a very calm, collected gentleman, to be honest with you. I am confident that we will move power sector a lot more faster now than what it was under Salamama. And like I said about Dr. Mahmoud, he's much younger, much more dynamic, and he's passionate about people. Because agriculture is about people as well. When you have passion about people, you tend to bring policies that will empower them and feed them and give them opportunity for enterprise to grow in the agri sector. So I mean, honestly, There is no time left. It's less than 2 years now. But in the next 1 year, properly focused, we can look at security, infrastructure, the energy sector, the agriculture sector, and a lot of other sectors out of the 9 sectors, and we bring out the KPIs. I mean, there is a wording in that statement that was released by Mr. President, consolidating on his legacy projects. This is very important. The president is conscious and thinking about legacy.
Well, he already did say that he doesn't want to leave the office as a failure.
As a failure, exactly.
Yes,
so this is the time to tighten supervision, monitoring, measurement, and evaluation. This is the time for feedback as well.
Let's take questions now from my colleagues in Lagos. Gentlemen.
Well, Mr. Mazu, I mean, being in politics, you know the time is of essence. Now that he says, well, we need to consolidate on those legacy projects. For you, when would you like to see, because when he says this will continue, do you have a time frame, you know, within which you think all of this continuation should end such that the people can have time to get down to work and achieve? Because look, end of this year, next year, you know how politics is. And so if the phase of those political activities start, can they still have the time to deliver on these policy projects?
Thank you very much. This is a very important question. I believe that in politics, there is another milestone for relieving officials in government, which is basically as political contest approach. In my view, by October of this year, Mr. President should evaluate and ask his cabinet members, who amongst you wants to contest election? Who amongst you is interested in any sort of contest? So that I can relieve you, thank you, and actually allow you to go and get your people's consent and mandate so that you become electable. We are not just imposing you on the people. So I think, yes, a lot more will come, especially regarding people who want to contest election. And I believe that between October to the end of this year, every individual who wants to contest election should be relieved of his position so that he will utilize 2022 effectively for campaign. The other area is, as long as there are criteria, as we now understand, that sectors are being measured and monitored, I will still say that on a quarterly basis, that's at the end of next quarter, which is basically between October to December, the president should call for a retreat and actually review exactly where the government is in terms of these 9 areas. And the president should clearly outline. At the end of Femi Adesina's interview, he mentioned some very clear deliverables of every sector. Those areas can be, those deliverables can be documented and will be a dashboard. And every minister will have a template that will be used to populate, and every 3 months, Femi Adesina will talk to Nigerians on the performance each ministry, and also that will help track the legacy of Mr. President and ensure that if there are gaps and there are challenges the minister is facing, they will be addressed. What is very important is the fact that there was a haggling between whether it's the president or the people that should actually ask for accountability from the ministers. I honestly believe that in a democracy, the system is such that everything revolves around the people. The president's appointed these ministers to help him deliver, but the only way reliable feedback can be obtained is from people. And I was a bit scared when I heard that he went at some point and the president said, I know this one, or I get feedback from my constituents. The presidents have the whole Nigeria as his constituents. When the president say, I know that the president knows a lot. But believe me, there are a lot of things that have changed between the time he was head of states, when he was military leader, when he was in PTA. There are a lot of dynamics that have changed. And Nigeria have degenerated a lot to actually warrant a very close supervision of projects. And I want to also say that the constituents giving president feedback, we don't know them. We don't know who they represent. We don't know what their interest is. So as an institution, we need to open up and democratically discuss the KPIs, the key performance indicators of these ministers, give us the opportunity to evaluate them. The president may or may not use our own evaluation because he has other institutions of government to evaluate them. But this is very important in a democracy.
Well, we have to thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Mr. Muazu Magaji is an APC national stakeholder and also a former member of the All Progressives Congress Presidential Campaign Council. Thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mohe.
Well, that press briefing was done sometime in July. You did see the date on the video there, and the deadline, September the 1st, was set by southern states to stop open grazing. A number of states quickly rushed to promulgate their laws and have since signed them into law. However, a few states have delayed in the South. We're looking at the implications of that particular law as signed by a number of states and what will be expected, the fallouts of it, because we've also seen response by governors who are not in the South saying that the results of the decision by southern governors has had an effect on their own states as well. We've seen that of Kwara, we've seen Kebbi, we've seen a few, even Gombe, coming out to say that they now have to make provisions for the herders who will be coming from the south of the country back to the northern parts of the country. So there are definitely implications for this. But we want to talk about the legal implication of this morning. We have with us Mr. Chukwuma Machukwume, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria and a former Attorney General of Imo State. We thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you saw the deadline which was issued by southern governors, and you also saw the drive by them to ensure that they did it within legal ambits. A few of them have delayed, a few have met the deadline which they set for themselves. But did you see a problem arising from the decision by southern governors?
There's no single problem at all. They have operated within the ambit of the law. The law gives them rights. If you look at Section 4 of the Constitution, which established the National Assembly and the House of Assembly, the State House of Assembly, Section 4, particularly 6 and 7, said the House of Assembly of a state is to make law for peace, order, and good governance of the states. So, what they have done was, the House of Assembly of these states have done, was to work on the provision of the Constitution that gives them the power to provide, make law, enact law for the peace, order, and good governance of the states. So it is within their ambit to do, and they have done so. So the governors signing it have also implemented what the Constitution envisaged in Section 5, that says the president executes the law enacted by the National Assembly, while the governor executes the law enacted by the House of Assembly. So we're within the law. They're within the law.
Well, some states did this in such a way that they, first of all, made provisions for ranching for cattle. But I do not know if that was carried in all. I haven't seen all the laws of all the states. It is how it is reported in the dailies that we know what has transpired in the state, or how our correspondents who are on the ground in many states are also reporting that story. But some state governments did make provisions for ranching. However, it was seen that that hasn't been largely carried, because we've seen some other states report an influx of herders back into their states in such a way that it is affecting the balance and even the good governance of their own states as well. So in your own opinion, the implications of this, you might say that there is no problem, but the implications, because whether or not we accept it, every law will certainly have implications for those who will follow it and those who would implement it. Would you say that the implications were well thought out before we went on with the laws?
I think the problem is that we are trying to move ahead to solve a problem that ought to have been solved in a proper way. there's what we're having now is the ejaculation of ideas. First and foremost, the question of open grazing, is this what we should be talking about now? The question of open grazing is an outdated practice. Let me put it in the proper context. The number of cows being produced worldwide and the system they're using. Take, for instance, Brazil. Brazil produces each year 252 million cows, which is about 39% of the world production. USA produces 93 million each year. European Union produces 85 million per year. Argentina produces 53 million per year. Nigeria produces only 20 million. And then what are the systems they're using? Argentina is using ranching. USA is using ranching. European Union, all European Union are using ranching. Argentina is using ranching. It is only Nigeria, with all this land mass and everything and population, producing only 20 million using open grazing.
You know, there's been...
So, invariably,
yes,
we are undercutting ourselves by using this system of open grazing that is causing a lot of problems.
Exactly. So now there is a historical background to our own, to the evolution of the consumption of cattle. It would seem in Nigeria, it would seem that we haven't quite approached this as a business. It would seem that we have relied heavily on, I don't want to just say an ethnic group, because it's not an ethnic thing, but we know that largely a major ethnic group has been responsible for providing a lot of the cattle which has been responsible, which has been consumed in Nigeria. And the rearing of cattle has now evolved around their own way of life and culture. And it is as a result of the conflict that this is having with farmers that we have now begun to pay it a little more attention. That's in terms of the I don't want to say the crisis that has emanated from this, but we have now seen increased conflict that has now gone beyond, people ate crops, or, cattle ate crops. It's now gone into the loss of lives, and not just loss of lives, but a massive loss of lives, and even allegations of land grabbing, so to speak. So that is now what has elevated this discussion in the Nigerian context. It is not because we want to make a business of this. It's not because, there was some concerted thought before now, that this is not the way to go in terms of what we're doing with cattle, but to make it a business. This is the background against which we have made these laws around ranching and also against open grazing. So from that perspective, do you think that we have handled the sensitivities in such a way that we haven't hidden behind the cloak of law to handle the situation on the ground?
Yes, I think I get what you mean, and I think you're right, because what is the need of adopting a measure that you know is not yielding the proper results? Why are we talking about open grazing when we know open grazing is not yielding the proper results in terms of the number of cows that is needed? We are using it because, as people are already now thinking, that open grazing is even going to be used to solving a different problem, a different agenda. If not, you see open grazing leading to murdering of people. You see open grazing leading to shortage of food security. Farmers are no longer going to their farm to farm. You see open grazing leading to people talking about land grabbing of our ancestral homes. You see open grazing leading to US citizens, Nigerian citizens, leaving their home in fear and going to settle in IDP camps. And you know that the open grazing, from the data I have given you, this data I didn't manufacture it.
Indeed, sir.
So you see that the open grazing is making us to produce, not up to 1/10 of what we ought to be producing if we are using ranching. So it means then that since open grazing is surcharging us, any person advancing that method is rather pursuing a different goal, which some people call ethnic hegemony.
So what are your thoughts? Do you think that for the states that have eventually signed this anti-open grazing bill into law, are you certain that are you confident that they will be able to implement or uphold their laws? Because this is not the first time that we've seen it. Way before now, I think about 6 years ago, we saw Ekiti State. Ekiti had the anti-open grazing law. It was promulgated under former Governor Fayoshe. We also saw Benue State about that same time, enact their ranching law, and we saw them also try to pass, or not just try, they did pass an anti-open grazing law, and we've seen the conflict that is also continued to stir in the state. So are you confident that, one, this will put an end to the controversy and the conflicts that we have seen, farmers and between farmers and herdsmen, one? Will it put an end to that? And then two, first of all, let's handle that. Are you confident that it will put an end to the conflict that we've seen?
I think one way or the other it will, but I think there is more. I read in the Guardian some time ago, in the editorial, that the president has earmarked 6-point-something billion for Katsina State for ranching. That is the way to go. Ranching should be the order of the day. So those states where the spaces are there, where the governors who has the land allows the ranches to be placed there. If ranches are organized, all these cows can go into one, and then we have multiple numbers. Nigeria has a lot of institutes dealing with this hybriding of cows. These research efforts that are going on in these institutes, can it be useful when you are having open grazing, all these institutes, would they be running around the whole country to treat these cows?
Are you confident? The question is, are you confident that this will put an end to the conflict?
It will, particularly joined with the fact that there could be ranches. There will be ranches. Because if you said all the states said open grazing not allowed, eventually if there are no ranches, where will these cows be? So there is need to solve this problem fundamentally from the way I have just read in the Guardian about the 6-point-something billion ranches being earmarked for Katsina State. If the ranches are now open there, then all these cows will be now moved from these roaming states where they're roaming, and then moved to these ranches, and the problem will be solved. And so, if I may come back to your question of the power of the governors. Look, there was this law, the Grazing Reserve Law, that was passed in northern Nigeria some time ago. I mean, that law cannot be operating the way it's being floated now, being made to appear as if it is a federal law. No, that law is not a federal law. That law was made by the House of Assembly of the Northern Region. And that law, if you bring it up now, you must submit it to the provision of Section 315 of the Constitution that said all existing laws must be brought in with modification to meet to be in conformity with the provision of the Constitution. As things are now, the things have changed since that 1965 law was passed. The lands are now in the hands of the governors. They are now in the hands of the governors. And the governors has the power to pick that any of the law, that anywhere, in the states where they are affected, that is affected, to each of the governors of the northern states will pick that law, modify it, because the law set appropriate authority, which is the governor, modify it to suit the provision of the Constitution, which has made land matter exclusively in the hand of the governors.
Okay, let me quickly send this to Lagos now. I know that my colleagues have questions for you. Coyote.
Well, that's right, Norbert, thanks. I'd like you to just also respond to this side of the debate, really, and this has come up time and again, the talk about constitutionally guaranteed right of movement and occupation, and those that have seemed to support the open grazing mode of running the business always point to this, saying, well, there's a constitutional right and the rest. So if you could just also respond to that in the context of this conversation, how does that come to play with the laws that are being, promulgated across the states, or southern states, that is?
Freedom of movement. Freedom of movement is in the context of fundamental right of human beings, not fundamental right of cows, not fundamental rights of spare parts, not fundamental rights of houses, not fundamental rights of any other trade. It is fundamental right of human beings. And meanwhile, fundamental right of human beings is not all commerce. Your right stops at the right of the others. Your right to carry on your business is not the same thing as a right to kill others in order to carry on your business. It's not. So fundamental right of movement has its own limitations, which are the rights of others to also exist and also own their own property. Your right of movement is not the same thing that it will enable you to come into my bedroom and start converting my bedroom as your shop. It's not what the law is envisaging. Fundamental right of movement is not the same thing as you should move and go into Aso Rock and start building your house there because you have fundamental right of movement or to own property. There are limitations within the law. So, I do hope that has, in one way, answered your question that fundamental right of movement is not the same thing as fundamental right as the cow to move into any area, and where that area is not easy to enter, you now use machete and AK-44, AK-47, and kill people in order for your cow to enter. No. That is not fundamental right of movement. That's not fundamental right of...
Pardon me, I smile because, lawyers will come again and tell you that, well, there's another side to that. That's why I smile, because, your submission will definitely always be countered by some other lawyers. But I'd like us to talk about the implementation of, these laws across some of the states that have, signed it into law, as it were. And you look at the police, for example. It's a state law, but you need the police to sort of enforce that law. The police is controlled at the federal level. These issues will need to be taken to court, for cases that need to be taken to court. So how do you see the enforcement playing out? Do you see smooth enforcement, or there are some hiccups, bottlenecks ahead?
Yes. You raised the issue of the police. A very brilliant point. The police provision seems to be an ugly contradiction of the provisions of the Constitution. I take you to what Section 4 says. Section 4 established the National Assembly, the House of Assembly, to make law. Section 5 of the Constitution then established the office of the President and office of the Governor for execution of the laws passed by the House of Assemblies and National Assembly. Then you come to Section 6, which created federal courts and state courts. The 4 I have earlier mentioned talked about National Assembly doing laws for the good, for the peace, order, and good government of the federal government. Why the House of Assembly will do for peace, order, and good government of the states. Now, you move to Section 214, which established the police, the Nigerian Police Force. The way Nigerian Police Force is established, it looks like a correlation that it will be executing the federal laws. But instead of going to talk about federal laws, it seems to be saying that there will be only one Nigerian police force and all that and all that and all that. So invariably, there's a lacuna now that there is no force or security or apparatus within the Constitution that is equivalent to what we have had in 4, 5, and 6, where there is a federal, state, and where there's federal and state. In all the 2, National Assembly, House of Assembly, the presidency, governor, federal courts, state courts. So, but then, the leeway is this. The Constitution, if you look at Section 214(2), it says, subject to the Constitution. So. And then you look at another problem, Section 215, particularly 4, that said a commissioner of state, a commissioner of police in the state, if he wants to carry out an order given by the governor, he has to revert to the president. So, that's where the problem you're highlighting is coming. I think the leeway is Section 2, Section 4, 6, and 7 that said the House of Assembly will make law for the peace, order, and distance. That enables them to create security apparatus.
So let me just quickly ask this as we wrap up now, because I know that a number of things are going to be happening also in the constitutional amendment. Are you confident that some significant changes which will help states even have even more autonomy will come out of the constitutional amendment process? We have to do that in about a minute, sir.
Yes. We look forward to that. That should be devolution of power. That should be devolution of power. In any case, so that should be devolution of power. If the power is, because look at the exclusive legislative list, which has 66 items. 66 items.
Are you confident that that will happen with the constitutional amendment? That's the question.
I look forward to it happening, although I think that is this new idea coming up from the eminent elders of Nigeria, where there's a suggestion that what we ought to do, not ensure this new creation of this alleged attempt for creation of new states, what we ought to do is that the states, as from the zones, should be existing, but the federating points should be the federal, the zones, and the states.
Okay.
The federal, the zones, and the zones will be northeast, northwest, north central, southeast, southwest, south-south. These are the zones. Because you see, there must be some power to be amalgamated to enable these zones to enable their component states fill the pulse of being a federating unit. The idea of piecing these states to become ants, incapable of even organizing themselves, not to talk about looking to the federal and ensuring that federalism, as stipulated in the Constitution, is operated. Continuous division of these states is a way of keeping new federal system on, and that's not good for us.
Well, it's a fine place to leave it. We have to thank you so much for sharing your very honest thoughts with us this morning. Mr. Chukwuma Chukwume is a senior advocate of Nigeria and also the former Attorney General of Imo State. Thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning.
I'm grateful for having me.
Well, we wouldn't go without saying what you have said to us. Look at this, emails. Mohammed Abdulaziz has this, Southern States and anti-open grazing law. He says this law will go a long way to solve a lot of problems in Nigeria. But the only problem we have is our politicians. They may be playing politics with it. The real benefit of it will be neglected. Well, that's the fear of Mohammed Abdulaziz.
Or Festus says sacking 2 ministers out of about 50, not exactly 50, means nothing, especially when only about 10 ministers are working optimally. It's time PMB overhaul his entire cabinet and bring in fresh blood. Hopefully, this will be a continuous exercise as promised by the president, and we Nigerians will hold him to his promise.
Well, Alexander Alassa, still on President's sacked ministers, says, I applaud the president for sacking and reshuffling of his ministers. However, I wish to put it to Mr. Additional that you don't change a winning team. You only make changes when you perceive weakness, even in a performing team player who can be redeployed to other ventures. These ministers have failed in their scope of work, hence the sack.
Wayphone talks about sack of ministers, says the sacking of these ministers shouldn't just end there. Their ministries must be probed as well. That's from Kenny.
Well, you see, Kenneth is okay. Well, hey, just disappeared on me. Well, Kenneth says corruption is a major reason why Nigeria has no constant power or energy supply. As for poor performance of the agricultural sector, the problem is insecurity. Farms and forests in the country are not safe. The sacked ministers are not to be totally blamed, as far as I'm concerned. What about the old bassa? About
Oh, yeah.
Take at this time, we have to thank you so much for sending your comments and your contributions. We're very grateful for them. Keep them coming in. Thank you for watching today. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf.
I mean, just to mention that very interesting mail we got from Joy Obadaba, quite audacious. Thank you so much. I'm Kayode Okikilu.
Yeah, Joy wants, she's applying to be Mr. President, that she's qualified to be a minister at 38 and she should be considered. Well, thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time. I'm Chamberlain. So.